The mic's already on, I might speak over that.
Okay, all good.
Look, good afternoon. I think the panel's all here, and Ross, you're ready to go?
Absolutely.
So let's just get underway. I think you might want to use your 10 minutes, and that might give us a couple of minutes at the end for questions. So if you just...
Any questions appreciated at the end?
Yes, of course. Yes. Okay.
And I have permission from Tony Moore, who's the only individual that I mentioned in this talk, to mention him. So I've got proof of that here, and I can obviously give that to you at the end if you wish it.
That's you're speaking on behalf of Paul Bryant, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's all good. Yeah.
Okay. Today, I ask for your willingness to see a much bigger picture. Plans that most of us are not aware of are in place to massively change our society, environment, and ecology with the seemingly unquestionable goals of sustainable development, resilient cities, and net zero emissions future. Our individual and collective freedoms and futures are at stake. The spatial plan seeks to provide a strong platform for a shift away from cars, despite family, elderly, disabled, and innumerable other needs for personal car use in Christchurch. By 2050, personal car use could be a thing of the past. Without using the term, the spatial plan recognizes the use of nudge theory in channeling our behaviors to become increasingly sustainable and designing our cities to be increasingly resilient in climate change. Computer modeling projections of climate disaster, population increase, and deadly viruses spread fear without real foundation and seem to pay no price when they turn out to be wrong, as they usually do. What if the ideology of United Nations Agenda 2030 is all we are facing? We simply don't know what we're going to learn next about any subject, and so there is no settled science, and we must remain open to the possibility of a very bright future that steps outside the fear-generated, computer-modeled world of climate science propaganda, and open our minds to the possibility we're simply giving our freedoms away because we don't see the bigger picture. This spatial plan must be seen in context of the smart carbon dioxide-free 15-minute cities programme being run by our Christchurch City Council. This plan is designed to support a shift in transport choices from personal car use to active sustainable behaviour, cycling or walking, and passive sustainable behaviour using public transport. The model includes modes of micromobility, like electric scooters. It's built on the supposedly solid foundations of our current understanding of climate science. If you accept the assumptions that are being made, then maybe the plan makes sense. However, the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan is not a Christchurch plan or even a New Zealand plan. It's a stepping stone for the smart carbon dioxide-free 15-minute cities programme currently being run by our Christchurch City Council and fed from the top down by the Smart Cities Council, which is actually a global organisation to which you can look up their website very easily. The idea of a 15-minute city is to separate our city of Christchurch into villages where everything the government believes its citizens need is within 15 minutes of cycling, walking, or taking public transport. This involves major change to the way our society works. This same land use plan has been pushed across Europe under the Smart and City project, which has had the 6-year objective to develop the European strategy for the creation of carbon dioxide-free smart cities. And also, of course, it's designed to be built around a 15-minute cities plan. In England, the same traffic calming measures that I'm going to talk about in a moment, for example, are being used with the same purpose of making personal car use increasingly difficult, with the idea of phasing out personal car use by 2050. Staff reported about barriers being constructed between villages in Oxford in England, telling of how local people would come out and destroy them at night. These barriers were also referred to in the article as traffic calming measures. I spoke to a Christchurch police officer sitting on his motorcycle, policing drivers entering the 30-kilometre-an-hour zone in central Sumner. He'd recently taken his personal car down Victoria Street, only to find the light sequencing detrimental to traffic flow. He went to Christchurch City Council and was informed that this is to make it as difficult for people to drive across Christchurch as possible. It's intentional. We are pushing people out of using personal cars. To clarify this, I spoke to Tony Moore, at the time the Christchurch City Council Climate Resilience Lead, Principal Advisor on Sustainability to Christchurch City Council and Science Liaison at Landcare Research. He explained that although he understood that traffic calming measures is a term used to refer to any measure designed to make road use safer, these measures are instead being used intentionally by Christchurch City Council across Christchurch to make personal car use unnecessarily difficult, to pressure people into increasingly active and passive sustainable transport behaviours. They are intentionally using, and you may recognise some of these, speed bumps, extended bus stops, cycleways, significantly reduced speed limits, massively reduced parking, priority for public transport, cyclists and walkers at junctions, and roadworks for this purpose. This involves an entire field of study known as nudge theory. This term is among many that as the people of Christchurch, we must now become very familiar with so that we can quickly see more clearly the direction in which our spatial plan and the Christchurch city rebuild has been hijacked to the potential disadvantage of children and future generations of New Zealanders. A smart carbon dioxide-free 15-minute city involves far more medium and high-density housing, essentially more apartments in the CBD and more multi-storey townhouses in the suburbs, less constraint on building heights and at most one car park per household in multi-household buildings. This is known as urban densification and otherwise as smart growth. When I last spoke with Tony Moore, he had just returned from Spain, where Christchurch has been partnered with the cities of Vitoria-Gasteiz and Malaga since 2021, with the focus of sustainable urban development with respect to climate resilience, as well as citizen engagement, a very important term, meaning to get us on board with a plan that most of us don't know about. This is the Smart Carbon Dioxide-Free 15-Minute Cities programme in action in Christchurch. Tony was very impressed with Vitoria-Gasteiz, where urban densification now means that everyone lives in roughly the same size apartment. Each apartment has a view that includes some communal green space. No one has a garden. So growing your own food would not be easy. In the spatial plan, there is mention of creating urban forests, but no mention of urban personal or community gardens. He'd been particularly surprised that there was no smart car programme in Vitoria-Gasteiz, but agreed that very few people had cars. It was difficult to move between the city's villages by personal car, and parking was very limited. Christchurch City Council continues to have online meetings with Vitoria-Gasteiz experts to define smart cities cooperation. These meetings purportedly discuss local implementation of Agenda 2030 and citizen engagement. I asked Tony, what if the climate science vilifying carbon dioxide is wrong and we're not actually facing climate catastrophe? Tony said that he knew that many were questioning the narrative, but in order to effectively do his job, he must take what the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, say as settled science. Remember, Tony's job title includes Principal Advisor on Sustainability to Christchurch City Council and Science Liaison to Landcare Research, yet he has apparently not questioned the climate science on which this is all based. To make things even clearer, he then added, and this is very important regarding ideology, even if the science were wrong, it didn't matter, because what he is doing is right for the people of Christchurch, even if the people of Christchurch don't know it. He agreed that this is UN Agenda 2030. Interestingly, Tony made it clear that he does understand the history of Agenda 2030, going back to the Brundtland Commission of 1983 and the overall title, Our Common Future, determined in 1987. Funnily enough, he seemed to know very little about the Internet of Things or fifth-generation inventory and control technology, for example, smart modules that will be shortly sitting on all our LED streetlights as part of the intensive part of the system, without which a smart city is simply not smart. Yet he is willing to believe that the science is settled. According to a Stuff article titled Sticking It to the NIMBYs, Not in My Backyard People, who quite reasonably object to new high-density housing being built in their neighbourhood, it basically painted those people defending their neighbourhood as undeserving, while putting an equally bizarre spin on pushing urban densification with the positive imagery of creating a right to build medium-density housing, even though clearly against the wishes of residents. final paragraph. Seeming practicality has been hiding actual ideology. The United Nations Agenda 2030 and the Smart Carbon Dioxide-Free 15-minute cities programme could define where we live, as well as how and where we will be able to travel. With the proposed 5th generation central bank digital currency, which is designed to carry carbon dioxide allowances with each transaction, already having been fully trialled in the UK under NatWest, we have all that is necessary for the social credit system that could someday mean that our sustainable behaviours are forced rather than chosen. This is all about biometric digitalisation of New Zealand, control of our water, and the potential loss of our freedoms. We cannot afford to be myopic. The Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan cannot be seen as a compartmentalised initiative. We need now to see the bigger picture. The people of Christchurch demand transparency and the right to a council that represents the interests of our community and the wider community of New Zealand, instead of those pushing the interests represented by the Smart Cities Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. You did pretty well with that, 9 minutes or so. So just going to the panel for any questions. Victoria.
Thank you, Ross. There's a lot of information that we've just got through in 9 minutes. Do we have a copy of what you've just read?
I can leave it to you.
Yes.
I'd be grateful if you could do that, please.
No worries.
I couldn't keep up with.
I've only got 10 minutes. I could talk to you for an hour or two.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to check was, I may have missed it, whether there was any references to any of the comments that have been made by the officers in the officers' report of the 4th of October, and whether you or Paul have actually read the officers' report, and if there was anything you wanted to say in response to the officers' report.
That's not been my focus of the talk.
That's okay. Because they address some of the issues that you have raised. So I just wanted to check on.
Can you think of a particular issue?
No, well, there's a lot of issues that you've raised that have been talked to in there. Around the 15-minute cities is one example.
This is about 15-minute cities.
I just want to know whether you'd seen the officers' recommendations and their comments.
It's not my focus.
That's okay. Thank you.
Okay. Ross, in terms of have you got that electronically you could email through to the team, or you'd rather leave a copy?
I'll leave a copy for you to photocopy or send out.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Scan and do what you like with.
Thank you very much. Other panel members, any questions? Just one question from me, Ross. The nudge theory you talk about.
Right. Nudge theory is basically an entire area of science that basically is designed through artificial intelligence, among other methods, to change our actions to becoming more sustainable. In England, for example, recently there was an example where they offered an incentive to follow sustainable behaviours in Warwickshire. And what they did was they basically said, you get a prize if you can record your sustainable behaviour in terms of your actions moving around Warwickshire, of cycling and walking and taking public transport. And at the end of the month, you basically get your reward. Additionally, with the central bank digital currency, the idea in England, where they have nudge theory working under the nudge unit in England, which we have a nudge unit here, believe it or not, they use the sustainable alternatives to your so if you're with NatWest, for example, you purchase petrol, the nudge unit provides you with the information of what you could have done instead. So you could have taken public transport, cycled, or walked, and it gives you a carbon dioxide allowance for the transaction. So essentially, if you've used up your carbon dioxide allowance by the end of the month, the chances are at some point you won't be allowed to travel.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you for that clarification.
So that's nudge theory.
Thank you very much.
But I suggest you study it yourself. Sorry.
Can I just ask a quick supplementary? Did you say we have a nudge unit here?
Yes.
Where?
I understand they're based in Dunedin, but again, that's something for you to follow up. But nudge theory
is it a central government agency, or where's it coming from?
I couldn't tell you even what they're called. They're not called the nudge unit here in England. They're called the nudge unit. So basically, if you talk to Tony Moore, he'd probably be able to tell you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, Ross.
No worries.
Right, Joanne. We have Joanne in the. Here we go. Welcome, Joanne. Coming up.
Hi. Okay, good afternoon. Are you ready?
Yes, ready to go.
Sorry, I'm not going to be that full on. I live in New Brighton, so I'm a long time resident and 4th generation out there, so I'm very interested in that side of town.
Great.
So I take it you've all read the submission.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just want to bring up a couple of things from the submission. A lot of it's open to interpretation. So that, you know, there's things in there which could be read several ways. And it's actually not giving us very good guidelines as to which direction you could take or which direction you're wanting to take. The wording about the east of Christchurch being a priority area, it could be taken several ways. It could be priority to look at adaptation of the area. It could be retreat. It could be protecting the area. There's nothing in the wording which indicates which way it's been prioritised. So the underlying assumption is that the coast will succumb to sea level rise sooner than other areas, where in fact the water level rise will affect all of the city. And we've seen that in the last few years with the rainfall and the impact it's had through the Avon, through the city centre and into Victoria Park by the town hall, into Avonside, into Heathcote, all around the place. So it's not just the east that's been affected by this, it's the entire city, but we've been signalled out as being one of the ones that's going to take the brunt of this. And I think there needs to be a larger view about the impacts all around the city. I'm on the Banks Peninsula Coastal Hazards Panel as a community representative, and the work that the Coastal Adaptation Panel is doing needs to tie in with any future planning of what's going to happen around the area. So I think that's one of the big things that's kind of missing out of the link of all of this as well. Tsunami threat is low, but as I said, we need to be prepared. But what impact should that threat have on the ability to actually, you know, for our whole area to actually thrive? You know, there's restrictions on building and development and everything, but should that be a restriction when, you know, as I said, the impact of weather events is just going to be the same for us as it is for in the city. You know, there's so many rivers going throughout our network and underground water. The groundwater rise is going to be the same as the sea level rise, so it's all things to consider. With evacuation of our area, our transportation links are vital. New Brighton Road, it's been kind of, there's no decision on the future of New Brighton Road being made, or we can't get any kind of certification about what's going to happen with it, and it needs to be kept open to actually help with the evacuation of the area. It's really important, but it's also a connecting road. We've got a lot of intensification happening in the east, even though we are limited to development, and there will be extra additional layers going on to actually restrict development. But you know, there's so much potential still there. And looking at the school, all of the schools are just about at capacity with their roles. The actual recreation and sport and everything we have out that way, we attract so many visitors to the area, to that side of town, to use it for sport and recreation, and with the beach and the forest and everything. So having those links out to there, you know, we're really a jewel in the crown of Christchurch, and we want to stay that way as long as we can. And one of the other things I just want to bring up is the partnership approach. And like, I'm all for the partnership, but the residents need to be included in the partnership. We need to actually have input into what we'd like our city to be like, especially outside of town, you know, because we've got that threat hanging over us about retreat. Talk to us and actually see what we want for our side of town, and what investment or lack of investment are we going to get over here? It's a really big one. Intensification, I'd also just like to highlight, when we're talking about going into these buildings that are very, very close together, just the problems that it caused throughout the earthquakes, especially like in little units of flats that we had out our side of town. One flat in a block of so many might have been damaged, but it impacts all the others around it. So I think that's one thing you've got to look at with intensification in our quake-prone city, is that if you build all these ones together and put them close together, just damaging one or two of them will impact the whole lot. So yeah, so the whole thing is with us, not to us, please.
Thank you, Joanne.
Sorry.
No, fantastic. So pleased you've come to talk to us, because certainly the difference between the east, which is a priority area rather than a priority growth area, we just need to understand ourselves and get advice on. So,
but as a priority area, it's like, why aren't we the same as the rest of the city? You know, the rest of the city is going to be impacted just as much as we are. Well, especially the ones around the rivers and around the estuary, over in the harbour. So, you know, we've always got this from the other side of town, especially that the east, you may as well just retreat and they're going to be all underwater soon. But along the coast with the sand dunes and the accretion, we're having phenomenal accretion at the moment. And on the sandy side of New Brighton, we're actually really, really good with the land conditions and everything. We don't get the flooding. It's along the river and through the Avon. On that side, our flooding is going to come from the rivers, if anything. It's not going to come from the beach side. But a lot of people don't understand that. And we get the bad rap that it's going to happen to us and everyone else is safe.
Okay. Victoria.
Thank you, Stephen. Joanne, I'm sitting here as a panel member here today, but I'm also a Christchurch City Council of Papanui. Thank you for taking the time to come and talk with us. I visit your area every weekend, and I really enjoy going out there. And I'm really pleased to see, there is a question coming, by the way. I'm really pleased to see that the recent investment in New Brighton, particularly in the uplift around the public realm spaces with the hot pools. So there's some wonderful things going on in the public-private partnerships. The matters you raise are real and they're important to you and a number of other people. Are you in touch with your local city councillor out there, Celeste Donovan, and your community board to talk through some of the concerns and the issues that you've got?
Well, I'm not allowed to say, am I?
Okay, so
I'm actually on the board.
That is great to
but
hear.
I'm here as an individual.
Thank you for taking the time, and that's important. So are you familiar with the Pages Road project that's going on, which is going to make a huge difference? Good. I just wanted to check on that. The primary question, once I got through the rest of that, was you made some comments around the blue-green network, and you've said it would be good to see areas which are not as fortunate as us marked for green space, not just a green belt. Is there any particular area that you have in mind that you think would be ideal for an upgrade around a green space that you wanted to share?
No, not really, but I'm just saying that we have a lot of it already out there, and there are a lot of areas in Christchurch that aren't as fortunate as us. So you'd have more idea than me, but I'm just talking about at home, and we have all the green zone, we have all the old farmland. So we're very, very fortunate. You know, we've got lots of sport and recreation and lots of playgrounds and parks and beach. So
thank you very much for coming. And I know it's a bit nerve-wracking presenting. Is there anything that you'd forgotten or anything you wanted to share with us?
There'll be stuff I've forgotten.
Kate, you had a question?
Thank you. Joanne, thanks for your presentation. At one point you mentioned transport links need to be improved. Do you have any vision, either yourself or from community board or other groups in New Brighton? What does an improved transport provision look
yeah, well,
like?
there's plenty of improvement needed, and like the Pages Road Bridge project is going to be one of the vital ones for us, but also keeping the New Brighton Road and Travis Road functioning to get, those evacuation routes and around Bridge Street as well, over the Bridge Street Bridge, just the network through there. There's a good car network, but there's nothing for pedestrians and cyclists apart from just a gravel roadside. So, there's a lot of things to work on. And the bus lines from North Beach to South Shore, there's a lot of things that need to be worked on through those things as well.
Thank you.
Gail, I think you had a question.
Oh, Gail.
You mentioned, Joe, being on the coastal hazards adaptation team. Has there been any investigations or options or anything done yet for the New Brighton area?
No, that tranche is coming after the Banks Peninsula, hopefully.
Right.
So, but there'll be a whole lot of other work that needs to be done, and it should actually tie in to the actual spatial plan as well to actually see what the outcomes are of those discussions first. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's interesting because we've talked about that, how that fits in.
Yeah, because there's a lot of work done with the Banks Peninsula panel and all the different bays and what's required in those areas for transport links. But every other coastal community is going to be the same. And it's a matter of adaptation, mitigation, or natural solutions. So, yeah, cool. That's it.
Yeah, thanks very much for that.
That's okay.
I mean, it sounds to me what you're after really is to ensure that your local community is part of the broader discussion process once we have a bit more information. There's obviously more risk assessment work to be done, and the country is also waiting on the outcome of the Climate Adaptation Act and what that might mean in terms of adaptation, relocation, mitigation, and the guidance that might receive. So is that something that once you've
well, the community need to be involved in all those discussions and included, and they need to actually not just be told, they need to actually, it needs to be a two-way conversation. And I think it's not just about the adaptation, it's about also having confidence to actually look at how we develop or undevelop things as well. So yeah, but we've got quite a lot of decades until we actually get affected. It's if we get affected, but we don't know. We haven't got a time machine to actually see what's actually going to happen in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joe, and good luck with that coastal advisory panel. It's an area that I work in extensively.
Yeah, it's been a long process, but
part of it so empowering. So
yeah,
make sure you keep going with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
But we do have a cancellation. Luke Chandler's not coming, but is Joe Davis here? We could go a bit earlier. Welcome, Joe. Submitter number 127. You've got someone
Good
with you,
day.
Joe?
Yes, so Brendan Hurray is presenting after me, but we're joining our presentations together.
Yep, all good. Okay, so Brendan's after you, so that's fantastic. So 258127. Right.
Cool.
You've got 20 minutes between you.
Great. Oh yeah, we'll just get yeah, here we go.
Did you want the presentation that you sent for it?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
So kia ora tātou. Just before we begin the presentation proper, I'd just like to note that our oral submission is somewhat different than our written ones because yeah, we've evolved our thinking. So what we're presenting today is a bit different from the written ones. So I'd also like to note that while being a regional councillor representing North East Christchurch, the views expressed today are not necessarily those of ECAN and are those of my own and of Brendan's. Through the general election campaign, the major parties both pledged $300 to $400 million for Canterbury transport projects. Auckland and Wellington were promised tens of billions. In all likelihood, we will probably do better than what was promised over the next 10 years because of our economic and population strengths. But whether we get mass rapid transit, who knows? There's a lot of uncertainty. Today, what we're suggesting and advocating for is free. We're asking for the protection of Greater Christchurch's rail corridors through the spatial plan so that future leaders and generations have the capacity to develop innovative urban form. You have the ability to make a simple amendment to the current draft that may enable Greater Christchurch to become more like Copenhagen and other successful cities that had the foresight to plan ahead for their futures. If we do not get this right now, then the cost to remedy poor urban form and hypercar use will be much greater in the future. So this is our design. It's a little bit light on that screen, but you can kind of make out the sub-region. The dotted line is a 30-kilometre radius, 20-kilometre radius. The dark green is our urban areas, and the corridor you can see is in light blue there. And we've also laid over it the proposed stages of the MRT. So my main involvement in this is around the design, and also I've been promoting this view at the Regional Council and also in the public. Brendan is going to provide the rationale behind the request. So Brendan Hari is a resident of Christchurch and has been a strong advocate for the region. He works as a registered nurse at Morton Hospital and has participated voluntarily in an urban land markets group of about a dozen policy experts that provided advice to the Ministry for the Environment about resource management reform. This group produced several cabinet papers, such as A New Approach to Urban Planning, which detailed the importance of spatial planning, and the paper How We Supply Infrastructure Makes Housing Unaffordable.
Thanks. To add to Joe's description of me, between 2004 and 2012, I lived in Helsinki near Tuomarila train station. That was just under 20 kilometres and 25 minutes to downtown Helsinki. In Greater Christchurch, the equivalent location is the 20-kilometre ring on Joe's map. This current slide is the view from our apartment. All the buildings you can see are within a few hundred metres of the station and were built between 2004 and 2012. In simple terms, what we are asking is for this possibility to be protected for Greater Christchurch. Firstly, I'd like to explain an important aspect of Joe's map. As most of you know, MRT stands for Mass Rapid Transit. The MRT corridor is where the Greater Christchurch Partnership plan to upgrade the most infrastructure and where they expect the largest built environment response. For that reason, it is described as the primary growth corridor. We would like consideration given to protecting the region's rail corridors as supportive growth corridors if and when required. The rest of this presentation is in two parts. The first part gets straight to the point and outlines our specific requests. The second part provides the rationale. So for our requests, we would like a land corridor to be designated so that double-track electrified rail is future protected in the following areas. The 32-kilometre rail corridor from Rolleston to Littleton, the 30-kilometre rail corridor from Rangiora to Addington, and a 17-kilometre rail corridor from Lincoln to Hornby. This Lincoln line includes a short existing spur from Hornby to near the Southern Motorway. From there to Lincoln, a new paper railway line would need to be designated because the original line was overbuilt in Premalton. In total, we would like about 79 kilometres of railway lines protected for future double tracking and electrification. We would also like a third main line designated for freight from the inland port near Rolleston to Littleton. Further, we would like a zone corridor that extends 1 kilometre on either side of these railway lines to be protected from low density sprawl. Within this wider corridor, we would like zoning indicating a minimum of 60 housing units per hectare. This zoning would be contingent on if and when passenger rail infrastructure is provided. In the meantime, the corridor would be protected from being developed over. Secondly, that any future railway stations, new public right-of-ways are required to provide walkable and active mode access out to a full 1 kilometre radius. Obviously, within Christchurch's existing urban footprint, like for the MRT growth corridor, these sort of stipulations would be aspirational, because although there are planning mechanisms that enable densification, how much and when to densify is decided by existing households and property owners, not councils or governments. But for the greenfield areas and the protected corridors, these stipulations could be strictly applied. Rationale. This presentation is not about arguing for specific rail transport projects or specific higher density developments. These should be investigated on a case-by-case basis. Our request is about protecting these options for the future. "95 years ago, you could catch an electric battery train from Christchurch railway station at Morehouse Ave to Lincoln and around to Little River. It took under 25 minutes to get to Lincoln. Unfortunately, New Zealand Rail chose not to invest in this passenger rail technology or any alternative improvement. Instead, Canterbury's rail network was put into managed decline. We think this was a mistake. This mistake did not happen to the Wellington region, which now has 90 kilometres of electrified double track for passenger rail services. That region, despite its population being more spread out, has higher public transport patronage, lower motor vehicle mode use, and a much better emission profile than Canterbury. The same mistake was, though, made in Auckland, but it was recognised about 20 years ago. Auckland's MRT networks are now in a rebuilding stage to provide an alternative to its chronically congested road network. We believe growing the capacity of Canterbury's rail network needs to be an option that is kept open. Our request is complementary to the proposed 22-kilometre MRT transport project and the surrounding primary urban growth corridor. Passenger rail on the existing rail corridor can feed into the MRT line at Riccarton and Papanui, thus providing a more comprehensive public transport network. In particular, the MRT project provides a high-frequency city centre connection. In the past, the tram and train networks formed an integrated public transport network for Greater Christchurch. So there is historic precedent that this approach will be successful. Another complementary advantage is if housing development on the primary growth corridor becomes constrained, then the protected areas around the wider railway network can then be used to provide secondary urban growth corridors. MRT infrastructure may be more successful than we anticipate. Once the initial MRT corridor is built, there might be high demand for further corridors. It's notable that when Copenhagen was about the size of Greater Christchurch in 1947, it developed the Finger Plan as its spatial strategy. This required protecting 170 kilometres for double tracking and future urban growth. Obviously, this is far greater than Christchurch's proposed 22-kilometre long MRT corridor. The future is uncertain. At the moment, when the major political parties are only promising hundreds of millions of dollars for Canterbury to get a bridge and a bypass, then expansionary rail plans may seem forever out of reach. But future government priorities can change, so we should do the work needed to prepare for that change. Unanticipated events do occur. Christchurch, because of the earthquakes, built at a density of about 15 houses per hectare in places like Longhurst, rather than 60 houses per hectare along MRT corridors, partly because plans were not in place. Global warming and New Zealand's shaky tectonic location mean unexpected, destructive, and movement of people events can happen at any time. We think keeping our options open is a sensible approach to this uncertain future. Our slide highlights the earthquake risk because that is fresh in our memories, but climate change may be the greater risk for increasing the movement of people. It's predicted that billions of people will need to move due to climate change in the coming century. Fire, heat, drought, and floods will drive them out. Less affected places, which probably includes New Zealand and Canterbury, may need to make room for climate-induced humanitarian disasters. Less dramatically, immigration may be far higher than anticipated. Last year, New Zealand grew by more than 100,000 people because of a high rate of immigration. At that rate of growth, New Zealand would increase its population from 5 to 6 million by 2033. Greater Christchurch, being New Zealand's second largest city, would receive a significant proportion of this increase. This is not to say this eventuality would definitely occur, only that preparing for all potential possibilities is a sensible course of action. Thank you for listening to our presentation about future-proofing Greater Christchurch. I hope you give the discussed request serious consideration.
Thank you very much, Joe and Brendan. Your speaking notes, are they available to email through to the Secretariat?
I can do that, yeah.
I think with the presentation going alongside that, we're trying to collect the information together. So I think, Jenny, it's the Secretariat at Greater Christchurch.
Yes, yeah, I've emailed it before.
Yes, thank you very much. So I've got a couple of questions, but I'll go to the panel first just to see questions. Gail.
Can I thank you? I'm just interested, you're talking about having a zone on either side of the tracks. We've had a couple of presentations and submissions around different styles of tracks, newer styles of tracks that like grass and things like that. In your view, do you think that those sorts of options would be better than rather than trying to keep, I'm just thinking of the reality of trying to keep a kilometre zone around the lines. So in your thinking, do you think that those sorts of things, you know, these new more modern tracks that are that can be put on roads but are not so deep and all that sort of thing would be just as effective?
We're not advocating for any one particular mass transit option. We're really saying that we should protect these corridors so that in the future we can build up around mass rapid transit. That's the underlying argument. Whether you have a light rail on grass tracks or use the existing heavy rail infrastructure, it's that's sort of debatable, but the important point is protecting corridors, which is, you know, I think a fundamental task here for this committee is the spatial planning of Greater Christchurch.
Bobby.
So, Gail's point about the corridors, I struggle a little bit out in Selwyn, where your corridors, you know, well and good looking at that, but I don't know the roads. So for me to consider, are you able to indicate where these corridors, you know, is it going to be along Rhine Road.
So the
You know what?
the easiest one would be the rail corridor to Wollaston, and then
Well, that's it, yeah. And Rangiora, they're easy.
they're easy, and then you designate a kilometre either side of that, and nothing can be built there unless it's 60 houses per hectare after the rail or some other MRT infrastructure has been put in place. The southern line to Lincoln, there is an existing rail spur that goes through Hornby, and it comes to near the southern motorway. The original railway line to Lincoln went through Prebleton, and that's where the cycleway is now. But that's been overbuilt. But there is greenfield between Prebleton and Hallsville, where you could designate a new corridor that would go to the east of Prebleton and then swing around to Lincoln. And it's not much of a deviation. And in particular, that if that's not protected, and it's almost certain that between Hornby and Prebleton and Hallsville will get built over.
Yeah,
and
we
then,
have a version of it over a topo map that has the roads that we can send to you if you'd like.
If you don't mind, because I don't know about Selwyn.
Yeah.
Just have you any idea of what Kiwi Rail's mind? Because we've, as a district council, we've had a lot of problems with Kiwi Rail. As far as opening up their lines, the Wollaston line and the Northern line.
If Kiwi Rail have an opportunity for more service, for more opportunities for revenue, that from my conversations with representatives, they're open to ideas. And also just around the 1 kilometre as well, maybe Brendan disagrees, but that's not necessarily a fixed distance. 800 meters, is a possibility.
It could be 800, and it's not saying that all of that would ever be built on. Some of it may be protected for other reasons, you know, because it's it's just protecting that option. It may be in the future there's just if it does get built, there's a series of train stations, and you know, and there's gaps between the train station where there's no urban development. It's hard to know, but this is all about option protection rather than saying that a specific thing will happen or a specific project will happen. Yeah.
Yes, go, Colin.
Thanks for that. Just following from Robbie's comments, because Kiwi Rail, I know, has said that, I mean, they've got issues that that they don't have double tracking in places and they're at capacity. And so what are your thoughts on that? So you obviously got a different perspective.
Yeah, we're not commenting on actual rail services or Kiwi Rail's ability to, you know, provide services or what they currently do. This is all about protecting the corridors as they are for future investment.
Yeah, this is a protection for the next century, a century. Like, this is a long-term idea, and other cities around New Zealand have got rail. Wellington's had rail for almost 100 years. Auckland's revitalised its rail. Can't see why Christchurch can't do the same. There've been double tracking projects in both Auckland and Wellington. In Australasia, it's very common. You know, this suburban rail infrastructure is very, very common. And then you have places like Helsinki that I showed earlier, Copenhagen. We're actually, Christchurch is an abnormality. It's the largest city in Australasia without a mass rapid transit network. So, yeah.
Grant.
Thanks, Joe, Brendan. Just commenting really in terms of the next phase of MRT investigation. My understanding is that the detailed business case, which is the next case, has been given the go-ahead. And part of the indicative business case included the idea of some visioning that might take place as part of that next phase in terms of what the stations might look like, where they might be, what the implications of the existing urban form might be. So that kind of work. I suppose what I'm asking is that do you think that that's something that needs to be taken into account, just about how that urban form might change? A kilometre sounds a long way from a destination point, but obviously what you're saying is that might be wide in some areas and near in others.
Yeah, I chose the 1 kilometre because that's how much you could reasonably walk in about 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes. So that's around creating walkable urban sort of urban footprints. But it could be reduced to 800 metres. But the idea is that you could walk to the train station in a reasonable time. To your wider point about the MRT corridor, and the urban form around that, is that there will certainly be densification around that 22-kilometre light rail when it's built, but whether that's enough for all of Christchurch's future is, I think, doubtful. The Christchurch could conceivably grow to something like the size of Copenhagen one day, and they had 170 kilometres of
2 million population.
Yeah. Wellington's got something like 80 kilometres of electrified double track. For us to expect that we can get all of our intensification along 22 kilometres, I think it's a bit risky.
Just a supplementary question. One of the issues you mentioned was the protection of the route through a designation process. In my experience of the proposed Northern Arterial that went through Christchurch, I think it was proposed in the 1950s and didn't really get a bit of traction until the 1980s, when the designations were finally lifted. And as a result of that designation process, there was a lot of urban decay through a big swathe of the city, and it basically made that part of the city dead, if you like. Once the designation was lifted, it revitalized that. So there are problems with the designation approach, as opposed to perhaps an urban design visioning exercise, and incentivizing development along the route. Is that something that you think is a possibility, a different way forward rather than designation?
No, well, I disagree that it would cause decay. Motorways are naturally severing, and the decay occurred within the urban footprint of Christchurch. That's, when I first moved into Christchurch with my family, we were in Forfar Street. I think it's Forfar Street, and it was on a house that was designated, and Dad worked for the post office, and so that's where he was temporarily located to. So areas like St Albans, certainly they couldn't redevelop because people they didn't know whether to invest in their houses or intensify or whatever to. What the main stipulations for what we're proposing would be in the greenfield areas, within the urban footprint. We, as I said in my report, we couldn't enforce any particular, any particular type of intensification, and the railways already exist. So, like that they're already there. It's not like we're not going to build another one. So I don't see where the decay would come from. I think you'll just be giving some people more certainty that at some point in the future, there could be passenger rail services on these corridors. Thank you.
I just would like some clarification from our officer team. Ben and team, you haven't seen this plan before in the submissions. This is new.
Yeah, that's correct. That specific one. There may have been another version before that, but
there was another version. Okay. Yeah. I do think it would be good because this is coming in under the theme of the submissions, but this is a specific request that's being tabled. Part of our Q&A process with our officers. Quite like to get the officers' perspective on what's been put forward by these submitters. I know that there's these rail corridors that are existing aren't featured as new routes or routes for development in the spatial plan. But just if you give us your views as an officer panel about this particular proposal, in terms of pros and cons, planning process, those sorts of things. Just for everyone's awareness, as we go along, we are doing a Q&A with the officer team just to get their advice as ideas are perhaps based in submissions are brought forward in a bit more detail. So I think that would be helpful for us panel. And you've answered the question I had about the size of Copenhagen. It's 2 million at the moment, but in the 40s when that happened, it was probably much less. Do you have an idea about the?
It was about 700,000.
Yes. So our spatial plan is looking at 700,000 in 30 years, but then up to 1 million longer term. So we've got that sort of longer horizon to think about. Interesting. So thank you very much for your thoughtful submission and for presenting to us. We'll certainly take that on board. Thank you. Right. We've got Michael Blewett is no longer coming. So is David here? David Ivory? Or is Michael, you here?
Sorry, this is mine.
Oh. Okay, David, just before you, we had someone called Michael Blewett who has just pulled out, I think.
Yes.
So you're up, David. Thank you. Yep.
I'm very pleased to be able to present to you. Thank you very much. This is a privilege that's afforded to everyone in the world to be able to represent this election and help make change. So I just want to acknowledge that and thank you very much. It is honestly, it's a privilege. So I just want to take control of my presentation. Can I do that? Am I in control? Okay. So this is from an article in The Economist that shows how, can we get that council support thing off somehow?
Unfortunately not.
Okay, so this is from a presentation from an article in The Economist, September 6, 2023, so it's quite recent. And you can see that New Zealand is an outlier in a bad way here, because you can see there's not enough houses and it's expensive to rent. But you can see there's just above the D in New Zealand, you can see that that line is going up. And that's almost entirely because of this. This is the Auckland Unitary Plan, which enabled upzone residential areas to go forward. And that's the red dotted line. Almost the entire growth of housing in Auckland came from upzoning. So looking at the draft spatial plan of that light, I am in 100% support of the spatial plan. I believe in the future, if this goes forward, that it will become a case study in good city planning. I think the planners have done a fantastic job. Plan change 12, that's a step forward as well. That's more detail, but it's highlighting these development areas. Now, for people who don't want development, this is a good thing, because what it means is the development is focused on particular areas, and you can still have your single family home, which is, you can drive to in your car. And I love the way that this corridor has been developed in order to connect those development areas. So it really is key to the success of the plan that we have a transit system. Mass rapid transit, I'm sorry guys, it's not a mass transit system. What Brendan and Joe were talking about, which is connecting Rolleston, Lincoln, all the way up to Rangiora, that's mass transit. That's 8 cars running at 80 kilometres an hour with stations every 2 kilometres. What we're doing, what you're proposing along the corridor that shown here is not mass rapid transit, BRT or light rail, right? But light rail, it's not light rail either, because we're not proposing light rail the way Auckland is proposing light rail. So it's, and words do matter. When you talk light rail, it's too amorphous. It's not defined enough. So what are we really talking about? We're talking about BRT or TRAM. Trams are amazing. I'm not going to bury the lead. I'm going to tell you this. Yeah. And I'm also going to talk to you about bus rapid transit compared to trams. So they both have dedicated right-of-ways. They're both electric. They both have expensive roadways or fixed tracks. They both have platforms, multi-door boarding, off-vehicle ticketing. The so-called benefit of BRT is that they're lower cost. But there's a problem with BRT, and it's BRT creep. And it's not your electric bus salesman. This is the fact that buses are so flexible, you can design them out of existence, which is exactly what happened with our tramways. 70 years ago, when our tramways were pulled out, those existing corridors, which we're now building up, have decayed and stagnated. Look at Colombo Street. Colombo Street has basically stagnated because the trams were taken out. Fossil bus routes. It's so easy to change bus routes that there's these fossils all over the town. This is Route 21, which doesn't exist anymore, but the signs are still up. These are buses. Buses are not durable. They're expensive, and need extensive and frequent maintenance, and they only last about 15 years. They are buses. High floor buses, because they are cheaper, because they are higher capacity, but they will require expensive stations to have level boarding. And accessibility issues. This guy is trying to get up to the bus on a little lift. Drivers have to swing into stations, and they leave a big gap. This actually has an expensive movable edge to close the gap. Bus drivers. We had a bus driver shortage. BRT needs more buses, more drivers, because they're lower capacity. They're expensive to operate. We want to pay our bus drivers well. BRT is popular in developing countries because of the low cost and high availability of drivers. We don't have that in New Zealand. Often BRT is proposed as an upgrade to tram. It's an expensive upgrade. People don't do it. BRTs are not comfortable. They're uncomfortable. They pollute. Buses, brakes and tyres do pollute. They're not reliable. There's safety issues, maintenance costs, operation costs. They're a third world solution, not for a modern Western city. So why do we propose BRT? It's proposed because it's cheaper. But is it really cheaper? That is a BRT under construction. This is a report which everyone should read, the Federal Transit Administration talking about utility relocation, because it's a thing that kills transit projects. So expensive. I urge you to find this and read it. BRT is often suggested because you just need to effectively paint lines on the road, and you don't have to touch the utility infrastructure. That's not the case. You need to build concrete reinforced roadways, because there's so much heavy traffic moving at speed, turning and braking in the same place, that you will destroy the road. You need to build a reinforced concrete roadway. It's as big and extensive as any track work. This is utilities along the two alignments of Papanui Road and Riccarton Road. And you can see that the utilities, especially here, this is the corner of Papanui and Tomes Road, that the utilities are already off to one side. So yay, we have a win. We don't have to relocate utilities as extensively as many other places. Why is that? It's because the alignments that we're proposing are along the old historic tram routes. This is a map of Christchurch. If you look closely, you can see those red lines. They are all the tram lines that were pulled up. And here's our route over the existing tram line. So this is the sales pitch for BRT. It's light rail on tyres. No, it's not light rail. Light rail is the thing that's been cancelled in Auckland. It's a tram on tyres. It's got problems. Dedicated right of way. It needs more space than a tram. It's battery electric. We can't use wires. Trams can be battery, catenary wires, or under road third rails. They need an expensive roadway. They need platforms. They need multi-door boarding and off-vehicle ticketing. Why on earth are they lower cost? There is a reason that they're lower cost, and I'll tell you why it's not a problem later. So what's the alternative? Another acronym, MET, Modern European Trams. Trams are returned to France with a vengeance. These are the cities that have put them since 1980. This is the tram network in Europe. Trams. I could not find a comparable BRT map. We know now it's important that we don't call it light rail. It's important that we start calling it what it really is, and that is modern European tram. So we all know what we're looking for. Light rail is like calling an apple and an orange a piece of fruit. They're both called fruit, but we know what an apple is and we know what an orange is. So use the right name. Don't use light rail. If you hear someone say light rail, say, what do you mean? I don't know what you mean. Do you mean a tram? Do you mean tunneled light rail, tunneled light metro? What do you mean? Ask those questions. If you have a consultant talking about light rail, tell them, ask them for an absolute description. And I'm saying we should be doing something like this in Stuttgart, and this is in Dublin. Freiburg and Sydney, all over the world, countries in cities like ours are putting in modern European trams. Can you imagine buses running down Oxford Street, Oxford Terrace and Cashel Street? You cannot. Just instinctively, it's wrong, right? So it limits the way that we can do our transit system along Papani Road, Rickerton Road, and through the city. But we still think about it because of transit costs. This is another report that you should all be reading, Transit Costs Project by the New York University. It describes how transit infrastructure costs balloon. There's another graph in here. Guess what? New Zealand is the outlier. Council support is on top of this, obviously. They understand that New Zealand produces the most expensive transport infrastructure in the world. If we were Italy, we could do 5 times as much infrastructure as New Zealand does. We could have 5 tram routes for the price of 1, or we can have 1 tram route for 20% of the cost. This is a problem. We know about this problem. This is another report that you guys should be reading, the City Rail Link Interim Review. Now, this went through the things that went wrong with the Auckland City Link. It's so bad, it's worse than the New York subway cost blowout, which is occupying a lot of media in the US, but no one talks about it in New Zealand. Has anyone read this report? Anyone here read this report? You need to read this report. It talks about how the development of the City Rail Link lacked clear accountability, lacked clear funding responsibility, lacked clear ownership, for goodness sake, and it had a generally haphazard project management structure. Now, this is not to say that the people who worked on the City Rail Link didn't do a fantastic job. They actually have. It's been well managed, but the problem is the whole management structure is wrong. It's failed. It's called the Anglophone tax. In order to make it work for Christchurch, Christchurch needs a tram reinstatement project. It needs one entity that designs, constructs, operates, and funds. But what normally happens? We end up with consultants, contractors, operators, and public-private partnerships. It means there's delegation of responsibility, and all liability has gone on to third parties, right? It's got to stop. It's the Anglophone tax, and it's what makes English-speaking countries, the worst countries in the world for developing infrastructure. We should be talking to Italians, asking them to help build us. We can't have nice things because the procurement strategy is broken. We need an informed client that can make decisions needed to build right, build quick, and build well. Funding is key. If you don't have responsibility for funding, then you're not going to focus on costs, are you? It's key. This is key to the success of a transit project. The right funding model informs all of our decisions about what to build and how. The most successful transit companies in the world are property companies first. MTRC, Kintetsu, Nankai in Japan, Brightline are trying this in the US. The funding model needs to have a property development focus to achieve both urbanism goals and to fund the capital costs of construction and operation. The Christchurch Tram Company should have a transit arm and a property development arm. Together, they make the body whole. And with that, we can enable tramways. Christchurch, New Zealand owns an infrastructure development company already. They know utilities and they effectively completed their core task. We can enable tramways, enable property. This arm will help fund the transit, but also catalyze the urbanism that we need along these corridors. I'm really serious about this. The enabled property, the enabled transit is a joke, but I'm very serious, especially from central government, that they need to relook about how we develop infrastructure in New Zealand. So how are we going to build this? All very well to talk about what we're building. And I totally support what Brendan and Joe talked about with the mass transit system, but we're talking about the this local transit system. How are we going to build it? Now, there's one problem I mentioned before about why trams are more expensive than BRT, and that is because trams need stabling locations that are close to the tracked routes near the tramway. If you look at this drawing, where are we going to do the stabling? That is the Achilles heel of trams, is that you have to have a stabling. With a BRT, you can have the stabling off in Kaiapoi or in Rolleston or anywhere. You can just drive off the road and go off, right? It's a problem. So where would we do it in Christchurch? We'll do it here. Take a spur off Church Corner to the rail yards. And then we can do this. We can have tram stabling on the Kiwi Rail stabling. We have a transit-oriented development, and this would effectively pay for the development of the tramway. It would also connect a part of Christchurch that's been severed by the railway line for 100 years. Now, this is not original. I stole it from Brendan. I half expected Brendan to mention this. He has a document on Medium talking about what he calls Marty, right? Yeah, Marty. I think it's a brilliant idea. And this speaks to my domain experience because I did this in Hong Kong for 30 years. I'm not talking through my mouth. I'm talking through my brain. I know this is how we should do it. Now, the whole reason I went through this convoluted discussion about BRT versus trams is that it really, really matters how you choose the system that you choose. Because if you choose BRT, you don't have the justification to have this transit-oriented development because Kiwi Rail will say, oh, you don't need that. You can just do your stabling out in Rolleston. But if you have a tram system, you need to have this space and you can justify it, and then you can have this transit-oriented development. So it's extremely important. Christchurch Tram Reinstatement Project, because it really is, this is what we're doing, right? We are undoing the damage that was done 70 years ago by short-sighted city mothers and fathers. We need to institute an integrated company that will design the system, construct the tramway, and by that I mean they're the general contractor. They're not just a couple of guys project managing another company doing it. They're actually the general contractor. They will operate the project and they will fund it. using transport-oriented developments like the rest of the world do. Why do this? Why not separate it all out? It's because this process is what builds the cheapest transit systems in the world, in Turkey, in Italy, in France. If you want to have an expensive transit system, divide it all up, give it to consultants, give it to public-private partnership.
David,
I've run out of time, haven't I?
yes, look,
I'll finish, Luke.
we're finding this pretty interesting.
I'll finish, Luke.
You're going for some more time because we had someone not come along, but probably a couple of questions is all the time we've got.
Yeah.
Starting with Robbie. So obviously you know Brendan.
Only from looking at his blog posts on Medium, yeah.
We're ongoing. We had 2 submitters yesterday in favour of rail, and I'll just use the word rail. Do you guys get together and share thoughts and present in force to politicians such as us?
No. To me, I'm recently back in Christchurch after 30 years away, and I'm sort of gobsmacked at how poorly New Zealand does infrastructure construction. And this is, so I'm only talking about this from as a private individual, but I'm bringing my domain experience to this. So I find it, this sort of stuff is blindingly obvious. If you step outside and look back into New Zealand, you can see why New Zealand has screwed up so badly, and it's terrible in the city rail link. It's even worse for the so-called light rail in Auckland. I'm ambitious for Christchurch. We need to do better, and it's really important that we do this tram system really well, inexpensively, because Christchurch isn't the only city that needs trams. There are half a dozen other cities in New Zealand that need trams, that had trams, pulled them out, and they need a good way to rebuild them. And it's not by farming it out. It's by creating a development, an operating company that can do it all in-house. Because the decisions that you make, I had a discussion with someone today about, on a project, choosing a single spoon influences the whole project. Because say you're doing an entertainment complex, and you need to have be able to do 500 people. So then you need a dishwashing for those 500 people. So you need to have space in the dishwashers for those spoons, right? When you divide it all up, the guy who's saying I'm going to have 500 people is different from the person who's saying I want that spoon. But if you think about it in a holistic manner, then suddenly you start making the right decisions, and you make the right decisions at the right price.
David, I think we're going to have to stop.
I'm sorry, yes. You know, I've sent this all through to the Secretariat.
Yes, so
they know all about it.
We'll get this far. So thank you for your time.
How much time did I go over? I'm sorry.
Oh, probably about 10 minutes.
Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah.
I did get it down to 10 minutes in practice.
Look, we're going to go to Tim now. So is Tim here? Come forward. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me here today to talk. My talk's going to be a little less exciting than the previous one. However, I support quite strongly what he's saying. A little bit about me. I've got a PhD in chemistry, so I trained as a scientist. I also studied economics when I went through university. And the main part of my work was with crop and food research out at Lincoln, where I specialised in helping businesses, particularly food manufacturing businesses, get into exports and grow them. I retired about 12 years ago and decided in my retirement I wanted to spend as much of my time as I had spare to helping make Christchurch be a greater place to live in, a more enjoyable place to live in. So I became involved in the Christchurch Coastal Pathway project. I chaired that project in the early years, got it going, remained on the management committee of that project. And in lockdown, when the government offered some shovel-ready funding, we grabbed some. And I'm happy to say that as of last week, the Christchurch Coastal Pathway is now fully open for public use. It's pretty exciting. We think that it will have at least 500,000 to 1 million users per year. I'm also on the Heathcote Community Board, the Community Board for Heathcote Ward, and I'm in my 3rd term on that. I'm on the Estuary Trust, and of course, one of the exciting things that's happened with the estuary is getting that, achieving the status of being a node of the East Asian Australasian Flyway. Birdwatching is $1 billion industry plus globally. We've got lots of opportunity if we look after that. I'm on the Opawaho River Network Group, looking after restoring the Opawaho and taking a hills to estuary approach to it. I guess one of the things I've learned in life is that change is inevitable and happens faster than you think. When I was young, I got to know my grandfather well. When he was a young man, cars had not been invented. When he was in his old age, people were flying around the globe in jet planes. When I was at university, I did maths using a slide rule and log tables. My son runs a business in Florida. He's got 60 people reporting to him. It's a business analytics IT business. He can scrape and process billions of bits of data in, well, only a few minutes. And he does it all from his apartment. He doesn't have a workplace. He works for a global company. So change is inevitable. And sometimes using just numbers like number of people growth of Christchurch doesn't explain things very well. My interpretation of the growth that Christchurch can expect is that it will grow by 2 Timaroos every decade, maybe a bit more, maybe a wee bit less, but it has to have all the infrastructure, job opportunities, and all those sort of things that it does. So I have carefully read the spatial plan for Greater Christchurch, and I am excited by it. I think it is excellent. I congratulate those who developed the plan, and I fully support it. I'm not concerned very much about intensification. I've got a very good friend who grew up in a city in France. He lived in an apartment building. There were good parks, spaces nearby, and his childhood was at least as exciting and fun as mine was in Greymouth. My greatest concerns for the plan is implementation. It's fantastic to produce wonderful plans. It's much harder to put them into place. This plan is a really good one and must be implemented. So please do not let it sit around and be a plan. We desperately need it because growth without planning can lead to shambles. I am concerned about the quality of some of the intensification builds in Christchurch. I think we have a bit to learn yet from the Europeans on how to do that well. They've been doing it for a long time. We need to make sure the green space is there for socialising, and that when people are living in a higher density area, they can have a really enjoyable life. We also need to be concerned about unforeseen outcomes. When I was on the Linwood Central Heathcote Community Board, I led our concerns related to the new eastern suburbs of the city becoming taken over by Airbnbs, and so got involved in Plan Change 4 and council's opposition to that. There was a real risk that those new buildings east of the city, on the eastern edge of the city, would become horizontal hotels. And it was a big fight for City Council to get rules in place to stop that from happening. We need to make sure that productive farmland is protected. I'm very concerned about some of the recent things that have been said politically on allowing that to happen more. Crop and Food Research spent much of its time building the economy of Canterbury by making the farmland more productive. It would be a disaster if great swathes of farmland just got spread over by houses. I'm a fan for cycleways, and it's important to get the message out that cycleways and public transport are good for motorists, because without them, we'll be facing gridlock. You know, you can see it every day. Things are getting more, it takes longer to get places. You sometimes have to wait 3 times at a stoplight. Now, it's going to get worse unless we effectively get cycleways and PT going. And those last talks were really instructive on that. I have a request from the Apawaho River Network group from my meeting on with them this week, that could we please, in Hornby area, which is where a lot of stormwater gets into our rivers, make sure that that untreated, uncoated roofs are not allowed. Ones, galvanized roofs that leak zinc and copper everywhere. I encourage that the plan remains people-centred. I was excited to see the people-centredness, including the involvement with iwi and the plans there, and that the city plan caters for a diversity of needs. One of the most moving community board meetings I was at in the Old Linwood Central Heathcote Board was from a group of Pacifica people who were living in large houses that were destined to be knocked down and replaced with intensified small houses, asking, where will we live? So we must make sure those things happen. That's the end of my talk. I'm excited by the plan. I hope to live long enough to see some of it happen. And thank you for your work.
Thank you very much, Tim. A very balanced submission and well written and presented. Do we have questions from the panel? No.
I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
No, well, look, it is. Like you've been through very clearly. So
yeah, sure.
That is a good thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, people.
Is Alan Gray here? Welcome, Alan.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I have a slightly different take on things, which you will have gathered if you read my proposal, my submission on the spatial plan. And I guess one of the issues I have is without the detail, it's hard to tell a lot about the plan. So where it talks about having a general corridor, that's lovely in itself, and everyone agrees, well, maybe that's a good idea. But unless you knew the details of it and therefore the implications of how that would be developed, it's hard to rationally comment on it because you don't know what the implications are. That aside, I guess one of the things that I find most challenging is that the justifications for a lot of what's in the plan aren't clearly articulated and, in my mind, aren't justified. And one of the major ones is that because Greater Christchurch is supposedly going to see a huge population increase in the next 50 years, or the next 30 to 50 years, depending which version of the plan we look at. But it's not at all clear that that will be the case. Forecasting the future is a hazardous undertaking at the best of times. And in terms of demographics, we can't take what has been growth in the past and say, well, it's going to be that in the future. Because we already know from a lot of work that's been done on global population modelling, a study in 2020 showed that the population of the world will peak at 9.8 billion in 2064, which is in only 40 years' time. And then earlier this year, the Earth for All initiative did a detailed modelling of the population, And they determined that the world population will peak in 2046 at 9 billion. And thereafter decrease by 1.7 billion people by the end of this century. Now, everyone might say, well, that's wonderful for the world, and maybe it is. But the point is that that changes the perception of whether or not the population will grow to the extent that we claim, especially given the fact that Christchurch, Greater Christchurch, has a negative growth pyramid, which means already we're having fewer children than would indicate growth. And the only growth that's possible would therefore come by immigration. But if we've already established that the world is going to face challenges in that respect within the next 50 years, next 25 years maybe, then where on earth do we think this growth will come from? And why do we think that it's so significant that it warrants what's outlined in the plan, if that's a justification for it? And so that becomes, I guess, a major problem. And along with that, another one is that we have to adapt to climate change and reduce our emissions. And therefore, we will go ahead and do these plans. However, if we're already in the situation where emissions from vehicles are reducing substantially because electric vehicle use in the country is increasing hugely, as I pointed out in my submission, electric vehicle use has increased from 10 to 20% in the course of 18 months. And so 20% of our fleet becomes electric and therefore low emissions. Well, if you project that out another 10 years or 20 years, then what do you suppose will happen to the vehicle fleet? So the argument of having reduced emissions kind of disappears because it's already been accommodated in another way. And so those, I guess, are two of the main challenges I find in understanding the justifications for the plan. Even those issues aside, then it raises the question of how such things as are outlined in the plan would be funded. And I'm sure everyone is acutely conscious of the fact that the council is in debt by over $2 billion at the moment, or rather the council on our behalf is in debt by that much, which means the people are accountable for that debt. Then how would we go into more debt to do this? And if we do, then all we are doing is shifting that debt onto future generations who aren't even here. And as I've already explained under the population issue, they may not be here. And if the population even decreases, then you're asking it to shoulder an even larger debt than they already have to shoulder. And so I guess my point is that there are challenges with how the plan's outlined and why it's justified. If we looked at the issue of intensification, a lot of the language is great, right? Because you have these communities where you're near to the hospital and near to work, and all of these things are nearby, and it's wonderful. But it's also a naive view of what community, an ideal community, used to be, and maybe can we recreate it? But it's not the reality of how people work, because people don't seek housing where they work. They don't do it now, and they haven't done it in all the decades preceding. So why do we suppose that we create intensive housing because it's near places of employment, and people will go, well, heck, I want to live there. They choose where they live for a variety of reasons, not least of which are social. And so that sort of rationale kind of disappears. And intensification is already happening around the city. So why do you then, not you personally, the general you, why would we want to restrict that to certain areas within the city and say, oh, well, it should happen here because this is where people work? except that that's not how people work. So that's really, I guess, a summary of where I stand on the plan. Like I say, I guess it's a wee bit different from other perspectives on it, but I think it's important to consider because this plan starts to embed the whole rationale for a work program hereafter that implements that plan. But if some of those fundamentals are just kind of wrong to begin with, then it sets at risk the whole work program. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Robbie.
So I transferred to Rangiora in 1991. The population was 33,000 in Waimakariri. Waimakariri is now over 70,000. We've obviously had to spend a lot of money on infrastructure and investment, which requires planning. So I guess where I'm just struggling with your numbers. We're growing, and I'm sure Christchurch is going to, and I'm 100% sure Selwyn's going to. So that's the dilemma I'm facing with your submissions.
It is a dilemma, and that's why I said, I guess one of the challenges is the past doesn't necessarily foretell the future. And there's, I guess, a time delay as well. So when I talk about the fact that there's a negative growth population pyramid, so there's fewer children than there are of those of reproducing age, you don't see the results for a generation. And then it does happen. And we won't see the impact of what I'm talking about for, maybe 20 or 30 or 40 years. But when those effects happen, they will be profound, because even at the moment, all Western countries have fertility rates that are below replacement. And New Zealand is no different. And so going into the future, every country is going to be grappling with population issues and how you deal with a declining population. And it can't be through immigration, because all countries are starting to go through the same thing. And soon it will be every country that's in that situation, unless all immigration comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, because that's probably one of the last ones that'll go through that transition. So I guess what I'm saying is that in terms of planning, I understand it's really difficult because you're trying to deal with a situation now where we have growth today, but will we in 10 years or 20 or 30? That's then becomes a challenge.
Thanks for your question there, Robbie. Any other questions? No, thank you for your submission, Alan, and your careful analysis.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Right, here's a familiar name, David. Do you hear David? He's cancelled. It's just cancelled. All right. I was going to have one about his name, but it's spelled wrong. But we won't get a chance. All right, so we are going to take a break now. Okay, Robina, would you like to go now? All good. You've got a presentation for us?
Yes. Right, I've actually got two that I'll be doing. This one, speaking for Leanne Ferrara as well. Right, I'm going to actually attack the elephant. It's not in the room at the moment, because what I'm going to say is probably going to be quite controversial for most people here. I can't get the slides going. Chair, could I just clarify, the submitter said she's going to do speak for Leanne as well. Do you want to does she want to combine the time for both so that she can just keep the flow up? Would that help, or are they two completely separate? They're two completely separate ones, but there are some crossovers in them. Up to you.
Yeah, we'll see how we go after the first one. Yeah.
Right, I just want, okay.
We're already through. I think I'll stand up because I feel better than. Okay. My talk is going to be on climate change mitigation, which is problem number 3 in the business case that's been done for the GCSP. My experience is a background as a meteorological observer. I've been a geology technician, worked in air traffic control where I retrained in meteorology. And you can see the rest of it, really a doctor of technology. So I've spent a lot of time around technology, also a lot of time around data analysis. Right. My interest in climate change has been there for a long time. When I was in the meteorological office, I used to spend a lot of time just studying climate. So I'm quite familiar with the climate for Christchurch. As an observer, I was based in Christchurch. I know what's going on here. When I saw global warming, I thought, this doesn't sound right to me, because when I was in the weather office, weather temperatures were a lot higher than what they are these days. And then I was walking along the beach one day and I looked up and I thought, those clouds aren't real. They're not suitable. They're not in the right position for what is natural for Christchurch. So I did a lot of research, and I've got this presentation I'm happy to share with anybody who wants to see it. That link there for contrails is to the UN presentation that Rosalind Peterson did back in 2007. And she talks about contrails, and I'll go into that a bit further in a minute. There's also a link here to a clip from Dr. Philip Boyd on geoengineering. And he was the Prime Minister's Science Prize winner in 2011. And he talks about geoengineering. All of what I learned has made me become concerned. The changes to the climate, you can look at data and you can think we're comparing one lot of figures with another, but there's a lot of things to take into consideration when you're talking about climate. To give you an example, positioning of screens. The screens for temperatures used to be in the car park side of the airport here. They're now positioned in the middle of the runways. That's going to create quite a big difference in your temperatures for a start off. So we need to be comparing apples with apples. That photo is of a sunshine recorder as it used to be. It's now an electronic equipment. And when I went in and questioned NIWA about their sunshine readings, I actually got told the readings are a lot higher now. That doesn't make that much sense to me. And I questioned it. Only a few days after I went into NIWA, the whole sun data was removed off the Met Service website for the whole of New Zealand. That might be just a coincidence. But data actuals show concerning results, and I've been doing some, and you'll see some further as we get through. There are also new cloud types. The ones on the left are the clouds as they were when I was in the weather office. Now on the right-hand side, you'll see a photo up the top there where there's a couple of plain jet trails. The one at the top is a contrail as it used to be when I worked in the weather office. The one on the left-hand side, that big long thing, isn't natural. Down the bottom right-hand side there, you'll see there's, you can't really see it because of that council support sign, but there's crisscrossed jet trails in the sky. The black trails one there, that is actually a photo from New Zealand of a jet trail. How can a jet trail be black? Okay, well, I'll explain that. Rosalind Peterson, I won't, not about the black, but Rosalind Peterson, back in her presentation that she did to the United Nations in 2007, mitigation for climate change. They're artificially putting chemicals into the atmosphere to reduce sunlight entering the earth. Just get your head around that. These persistent jet contrails are changing our climate. One contrail can expand to 4,000 kilometres and last for 20 hours. This is since late 1980s. Man-made clouds are warming our atmosphere. So yes, it's man-made, all this climate change, but it's man-made in a different way to what you might think. something come up on the screen. Okay. This next one, this is some data stats that I had at home and was just playing around with. The columns that I've got marked there, the maximum monthly high temperatures, this is from recordings taken. So this is climate data. Recordings taken between 1863 and 2006. The average maximum monthly high temperature was 30 degrees. I did the latest figures from NIWA and it came out to 25 degrees. That means there's a 5-degree drop in our maximum temperatures. Now, if you get caught up in the other temperatures, it can get quite confusing, but the two on the other side, that's the minimum temperatures. Minus 2.9 was the minimum average low, and it's now 0.22. What that is reflective of is if you have a plane goes overhead, drops the trail and puts cloud out over the top of the sky, it's going to trap it's going to stop the extensive heat coming into the atmosphere, and it's going to stop it reducing out. You know how if you have a sunny day in the winter time or a sunny day, clear skies, it's a lot hotter. When you have low at the same time, when you've got the cloud over the top, the temperature on the ground won't get as low. Now, if you've still got doubts about what I'm saying, these are patents for geoengineering. Those links on the left-hand side take you to the actual patent. Smoke screen, process for controlling weather, metal chloride screening, smoke mixture. This is not just one page, this is page after page. There's 8 of them. Cloud seeding exists. I'll go on further. Facts versus modelling. There's real climate data sets that have been put together by John D. Christie and other people, but he's a person who I have a great deal of respect for, and I've actually seen him debating things with a lot of, like he's gone into universities and debated with students and things like that. He has put together real data sets from satellites and from weather balloons. And if the satellites readings went right, they were confirmed by weather balloons, but there's actual figures. This is versus the theories that are based on assumptions. That red line is the climate modelling that is done from computers. You only need one assumption to be wrong to throw the whole modelling out. There's also media bias. One of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, that's the IPCC, one of their scientists who was actually pro-climate change actually said that when he put together the possible extremes, the media were grabbing hold of one of the extremes and dramatising it, putting people into a state of fear. There's NIWA who's missing data. The IPCC data is based on flawed data. In 2018, John McLean did a PhD, and it was the first ever audit of the data that's the base data for climate change. There were 70 plus issues with that HUD-CRAT4 data. Things that places were in the wrong position. There was no identification for some of the places. A whole list of things, as I said, there's 70 of them, and I've got that report if anybody wants it. But the HUD-CRAT4 is the primary data set for IPCC. It's used to justify demands for trillions of dollars to be spent on combating climate change. And it's the basis for the Paris Climate Accord. Scientists deny it's a climate emergency. There's more than 31,000 scientists have signed a petition denying that man is responsible for global warming. Well, there's definitely something going on, but McLean put down in his summary that the alarmism is the creation of just 53 people, and yet it's shown to be 2,500 IPCC scientists, that's Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change scientists. 46 of them in this paper here, right, denying. Have I run out of time here?
Yes.
Sorry.
Have you got a summary just to finish off? Or?
Yeah, there's not much to go.
Perhaps another couple of minutes and we'll have to
stop. This document here, 46 climate denying things. Some of the people have said that they didn't even agree with it. Much more progress is necessary regarding our current understanding of climate and the abilities to model it. You're welcome to have a look at this. If you want a copy of it, I can produce it to you. The real consensus, a lot of the people that are involved in this whole reporting on climate change are actually impacted by the money that they make on it. And I'll just quote out this, Ottmar Edenhofer. He's speaking in 2010 and he advised that one has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. Instead, climate change policy is about how we redistribute de facto the world's wealth. And I think that's what it's all about. When you actually get into this and you understand what's going on here, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. This isn't, I won't go into this part of it, but.
So this presentation, we've got it.
Yeah, I can send a full one with the links in it as well.
I think it'd be good to do that.
Yeah,
because we probably are running out of time. So any final comments?
Yeah, the one thing I'd say is we're better to seriously look at how we live our lives and try to get back to some simpler ways than reliance on just believing all this climate change. And there's a whole lot of stack of references there to support everything that I've said.
Thank you very much, Robina.
There's also this document here, which is 1,500 signatories that there is no climate emergency.
Thank you. Any questions, panel? No, so thank you very much. I think we will take a break.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, and then I think Joe Holland, is Joe here?
Yep, present.
Yeah. Present. We'll see you at about 3 o'clock. We'll just take a 10-minute stop and we'll come back at 3. And is you're going to do the ends as well?
Joe can do it first.
Okay.
I don't mind, I'm flexible.
Okay, all right, we'll go and have a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 3 o'clock. Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, it's called the public. And like I said in my presentation, it's a privilege that's not afforded to everyone in the world, and we should be grateful to do so. Yeah, I disagree because frankly, there are a lot of misinformed members of the public, and we elect people who have our interests in heart, and we trust them enough to make decisions on our behalf and to take advice from the places that we need to get advice from, because there's such a diversity in the public that it needs to be crystallised and made sense. So I disagree that representative companies. but we need this consultation process to. Yes, this is a consultation process, but it's up to them to decide whether to take account of what we say. Right? They don't have to, they don't have no obligation for them to take account of what we say, but yeah, that's right. Well, they should. Whether they will in their consultants is another matter. Whereas a true consultative government means that there's a reference on everything, and that's it's not. I for instance, right, don't sit around and have lay people discuss on what population is. Right, we trust the doctor, but we should also ask the doctor and talk to the doctor to make sure that they are making the right decision, but then trust them to make the right decision. You know what I mean? Because I mean, well, this was the trust in my presentation is that the structures that are used to build infrastructure. I don't believe that they'll change, but they should. I know. I mean, I told the story earlier today. I had my brother's in his last 2 years the last 2 years he was approached by the ministry. They gave him a sticky. They gave him a stipend in order for him to get some the proviso was that he would work for 2 years in the industry after graduation. And he gets a government job. 2 years in, ministry of works was privatised, came down, or whatever it was, and the management buyout got shared, and then worth millions. That's millions on the back of every New Zealander. Okay. And the way that makes it inside it.
Oh no, Robbie's not the mate. She's at the whole mate. Please don't. I'm hopeless at speaking. If I spoke, I would be like a lunatic. So anyway, I was like getting notes.
Ministry of
whether she'll say I don't know.
And it's a huge, super impressive landscape forming project. Ministry of Works. Do you think we could do that today? No way.
Yes, that's what I would do. And I would like to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just like put off, turn it off. I was going to go away get together with a group of people, and that never happened. Like that may have been anymore.
Yeah, well, it's how it's done overseas in non-English countries, and they look back and they look at the way English-speaking countries and they laugh. They just go, why aren't you doing that way? It's just bonkers. Yeah, you need to do the whole thing. I mean, I look back at remember railways, right? I am really now to remember railways, and you go to railway station and you sit down and it's got railway logo on the battery, and people go, they say, this is, here's the thing. There's something I could have said. Peter Beck did a good interview with New Zealand Herald, and he's saying that only stations that exist, the ones that do the whole stack. Elon Musk he's doing the whole stack. He's doing everything. His car company is the same thing. He makes everything. I'm due next week. I know, but
something that
the point is,
school, I like to look at things
they
on
are
paper.
vertically
And so I came
Elon
to
Musk universities. And so we should be doing the same thing.
Brace
It's the
yourself
best
for
way to
ideas.
get stuff built, just to do the whole thing. Because I gave the example of food. Your choice of food determines the business model or your convention.
But no, but the thing is, I'm trying to get information and I've gone into.
No,
the
that's what I'm
service
saying.
center to get
It's the decision making shouldn't be done outside
They
the
didn't have
which is what happens with subdivided
They usually
into
keep copies.
different parts.
You know,
It
they
needs
get
to
out
be
a bunch of
made
extra.
within the
They
organisation.
put a sticker on it, this is not to be removed from the library.
So
Yeah, I have done that. Of the service center didn't another friend of mine had gone into the mail here down below and asked for one, and they said they didn't have any. She persisted, and they didn't look back, they came out with boxes of them.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I come from a consulting background, and you know, I can see but this is
Well, my
the other thing
point is that there was a bunch of
we
people
want
that they were distributed.
we need more people because we can do more projects when there's this vertical, because it's becoming cheaper to run projects. And we still need those consultants. Specialist knowledge is required, but it's all managed and controlled by the central. And same with the contract. It's just the general contract that is choosing your
And then there was one, they always have a big sticker on it. This is for our use. And to look at it at the library, so I've never seen that there. And they didn't, what I was talking about, they'd never seen it. And
I do know that, like, from what I understand.
Yes, it's that person that took the box. Because it was the, like, the day before your Easter. And she distributed. Right, so if you have another one just now, or is it downstairs?
I'll ask my colleagues.
Yeah, because I took her copy.
Yeah.
And she thought she had another one to call, but anyway, yeah, she's.
Oh,
doing
okay.
it.
No worries, I'll make sure to give you one.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
And so, thanks so much.
So you're
appreciate it.
You're gonna talk to the part of getting around. Oh, we go. So you didn't get say the CO2 thing? No. So yeah, so you can just say that's got that reduce CO2. Well, CO2 doesn't reduce CO2. Reducing CO2 won't be.
Yes, we haven't really settled on the
CO2 and then CO2 that's needed.
One of the other things that we've got
So
really
it's
good
in-
graphics.
Because the answer not brief wants to be straight.
Yeah.
That's fine. I don't. Because I mean, assuming that's they don't release the public administration. If they're not, we'll just continue use.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I think, yeah, if they're going up.
So they're only broken down into individual presentations.
No, we're still thinking about that.
Yeah, we
Please,
did.
please.
This Jenny has to sit there splicing
Oh,
it all.
no, and I've not done that before, so it would probably take time. But look, they're all of the things that we are considering.
I appreciate it. All right, well, very good. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. Then you know what lie. Yeah. Practice at 3 o'clock. And then, the next time I talk, they tell you that when you do it. I ran an lecture last Thank you.
Yeah. And again, there's other guys in my time, so. So he had an extra slot and something. Yeah, so just
Yeah, I'm not too worried. I'll give it to Joe. He'll probably need it.
Okay, all good.
Go a few more minutes. No, you're next.
I'm next,
Yeah, yeah.
But I have my minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
I won't.
Yeah. That was nice.
No, he said I couldn't. I like to make it. What was it? I could do it twice. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was yeah, I just yes, because it's yeah.
Just so happens that there's time in that schedule.
I've talked to her, so
Pardon?
I've already talked to her, so
Right.
Oh, Joe, would you like to come forward? We'll get underway.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, welcome.
Thank you. I'll get straight into it then. Hey, good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. Today, I'm going to address each of the 6 questions, providing I've got the time. The questions and statements as outlined in the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan. But firstly, a little bit about myself. I'm a living man. I'm commonly referred to as Joe Holland. I have 5 beautiful children, aged 20, 18, 16, 15, and 12. And I'm married to my beautiful wife, Shirley, of 23 years. I'm here today to address you as I have great compassion for the people of our beautiful country, New Zealand, Aotearoa, and I'm very concerned with these plans. Firstly, number 1, do you support the improved public transport system proposed in the draft? I do not support the proposed public transport system in the draft plan, as it has limitations as to how the delivery of the transportation may take place. It does not lead out to Rangiora, where I live, and it serves geographically a very small link area. There is no context as to how one may be able to ride the transport system. And given council have been given a reminder by the Chief Ombudsman, Peter Boshier, for transparency, I'd like full and further disclosure of this. Furthermore, Christchurch, by international standards, has a very low population base and does not have the people numbers to support such an initiative. Most importantly, and of further greater concern, how much is this transport system and how is it going to be funded? With the Christchurch City Council and over $2.2 billion of debt, the Waimakariri Council and $181 million of debt and growing, and the Selwyn District Council and over $116 million in debt. These figures taken from the local government funding agency. I again ask you and address you, who is going to pay for such a transport system? Or do you just wish me to put me and my children and my grandchildren, potentially great-grandchildren, and the good people of these districts in greater debt bondage? Is it the ratepayers and the taxpayers of these respective councils going to pay? With growing costs of food, power, fuel by inflation, this is of immense concern. Furthermore, I have concern for the continued rise in rates in general and taxes. Can anyone here tell me when these rate rises will stop? Where is the ceiling for rates rises? Who are the international investors through their LGFA that you are council? Well, actually, it's us ratepayers. You're borrowing these vast sums of money from. Who are they? Is this sustainable and fair for the people? Question 2, concentrating future housing development around urban centres and along public transport corridors will enable a greater choice of housing to be developed. I've been commuting from Christchurch, Rangiora to Christchurch for 16 years, and I believe there is no currently need, like over the last decade and a half, for investment in urban centres to raise rates and taxes for the public. Our transport corridors are managing the growth and the development based. But off modelling, it is not fiscally sustainable, this move for the people of Greater Christchurch. If you say concentrating future housing is to be developed around urban centres, I think and believe we should be expanding housing land sizes and encouraging and teaching people and educating them to live more sustainable with home gardens, chickens, fruit trees. I ask you, where is the initiatives for this? Packing and stacking people into apartment and terraced housing does not teach resilience. It does not teach self-sufficiency. It teaches people to be more reliant on supermarkets and the steep inflation inflicted prices, and therefore puts more money into big business and corporate pockets. Is that helping you and me and the people of our districts? Especially those living on low wages or the minimum wage? Is this what we need, more money, as your plan suggests, with corporations that already exert too much control and take too much of the pie? We wish to see greater freedoms for our families, friends, and our communities. Too much now are we dependent on commercial food producers for our food supplies. And at this point, I'd like to draw your attention to United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 11. By 2030, they want to enhance inclusive and sustainable urbanisation and capacity for participatory, integrated and sustainable human settlement planning and management in all countries. And I could go on with those UN agenda goals? What from our statement does our plan support in relation to those goals? 11.6 from the UN Sustainable Development Goals. By 2030, reduce the adverse per capita environmental impact on cities, including by paying special attention to air quality and municipal and other waste management. Does intensification of housing produce and support that? What else are you not informing us or giving us full disclosure on? 3. Oh, sorry, I'll skip 3. Go straight to 4. One aspect of the blue-green network approach is to maintain green space, to act as a, keyword here used, a buffer between urban and rural areas. Known as a green belt. This has multiple benefits and could include a range of different uses, etc. Again, there's very little explanation why such green belts are needed. I do not support this green belt initiative. Why are they needed? How and who will fund them? Will it contribute to the local council's continued rise in rates? We already have an abundance of recreation areas within minutes of Christchurch, Rangiora and Selwyn, bike parks, dog parks, rivers and beaches. Nature is well protected, so why the need to create further green space? This appears to be limiting choices of the people. Why is the term buffer used in your question? What is the definition of such a term in this context? We are very lucky in Canterbury to have a low population base, and therefore we have a lot of open green areas. They're open to the public. Why this initiative, I ask you? Question 5, the following priority development areas have been identified in the plan. Rangiora Town Centre and surrounds, Rolleston's Town Centre and surrounds, Papanui, Central Christchurch, the list goes on. I believe these are not required specifically when you claim the need for a partnership approach to support this area to adapt to the impacts of climate change and to strengthen resilience. These words also appear to come out of Agenda 2030. For example, 13.1, 13.2, 13.3. I could state them, but I think you understand. Again, how would this be funded? With increasing debt and proposals like this coming from centralised areas of control from our central government, I object to this priority development area. Climate change is not a science that is settled. It is constantly challenged, but a single narrative from a controlled agenda states that we are experiencing impacts of climate change. However, what we are experiencing is climate control. And with that, the mind control of those not yet open to the idea that climate change is just the latest gimmick that flows on from the likes of peak oil, coastal land inundation, from rising sea levels. Lastly, do you agree with the draft spatial strategy outlined above? No, I do not, because we are all created equal, and the above plan seeks to control the people. I strongly disagree with the draft spatial plan strategy. Again, there are too many links to the Agenda 2030. They look to limit where we can live, how we can live our lives, and our freedoms, including our freedom of movement. I cannot and will not support this. Our lives need greater freedoms, not intensification that limit our ability to support our families. We live in the current world of control. There are greater numbers of people worldwide waking up to the central government control, passed down to local governments to implement their agenda. Lastly, and in closing, what if we all agreed on all of the above proposals? What would it cost? Do you have a figure for the people? Who would pay and how? What is the measured impact on our health and well-being being further indebted to international investors we cannot and you cannot even identify? I will support proposals by local government that are clearly laid out, clearly explained and support our communities. There must be very clear transparency between councils and the public to make an agreement, not just convoluted pages and pages of detail that the average person does not have time to invest in understanding as to what the hidden agenda may be behind the copious amounts of writing. The Local Government Act states that local authorities should conduct business in an open and transparent and democratically accountable manner. The Waimakariri District Council was one of 8 councils investigated by the Ombudsman. Came out on October 24, a couple of days ago. Are we being given full disclosure of all the information and who's behind it and why? It is time you got back to the core basics of supporting communities with a common sense approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. I'll see if there's any questions from the panel. No? Okay, thank you very much.
A bit disappointed there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Right, Robina, I think you're going to talk to us again, and we've certainly got some time for you to catch up with anything I wanted to say on your original submission, so you're welcome.
I haven't got that with me. Back there. Okay. Hello, everybody. Again. I'm here speaking on behalf of Leanne for this one. Okay, we're going to look at, let's use a little logic. Are these real or idealistic greens? Oops. Anyway, what this presentation is based on this here, I don't know whether anybody's ever seen it, but it's a 15-minute city outline and how it operates. Okay, whether you've seen that. So the number 1 on it was eat healthy. When it comes to eating healthy, I don't see it working so much in high-rise apartments. People can have gardens, they can trade their food, they can eat organic from their own gardens, and there's nothing like going out and picking your own fruit and going and having or taking vegetables inside. There's no packaging, saves transport costs, so there's reduced emissions. And our red zone could be a resource for food. Health, when it comes to health, I have a lot of concerns about technology, and we're talking about smart cities, which is full of technology. There's a current decline in the bee population, and they're putting that down to the environmental stressors. There's also issues around people's health and the potential of chronic exposure to low-level radio frequency and microwave radiation. There's a lot of health issues that are, it's not necessarily related directly to it, but there's a lot of research being done on that whole area, and there's some differing opinions on it. And I wonder how much health and safety assessments have been done by the councils. Getting around, is public transport what the people want? Well, according to the business case, if things remained the same, I think there'd be 1.5% increase in public transport use by 2051. So it doesn't sound like it is. Nobody seems to have looked at the idea of reducing the size of cars, and I thought that was quite a good one because there's a lot less damage and things and less disruption should the Alpine fault hit when it does, when the Alpine fault hits. Also, there's concerns about electric vehicles with the lithium-ion batteries. Taking care of your health, 15 to 20-minute cities don't seem to really do that to me. The National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences acknowledges that additional research is needed. This is an American body, but if they haven't even got, if they're recommending it, I'm sure we'll be well behind on it. Do you think more technology will help our health? I doubt it. The GCSP also doesn't seem to really take into consideration disabled people. And I brought this up at one of the hui mai things, and nobody had any answers for that whatsoever. Exercising naturally, well, like overseas, they're doing what they call green bathing, which is going into forests. So we need to be making sure that we've got that flexibility to be able to get out into those areas, get out by the lakes and that sort of thing. Being engaged in your community. I've done a lot of work as a volunteer, and I can tell you that the numbers for volunteers are decreasing all the time. It's amazing because we seem to be in an environment where the mentality is to take rather than to give. And yet there are huge mental health positives from giving back to the community and being around people and learning to appreciate the differences, which is something that I don't see being done quite often. And I think this is why some people struggle to be around others. Enjoy the outdoors. Kiwis are very known for this, and Canterbury in particular. It's an active person's dream. You can ski and surf on the same day. Where did the idea come from for this 15-minute cities? And it's globally. Share and reuse. I'm a great believer in this, and I'm also a great believer in living close to a city. But there's things that come along with it. The reusing, trade meet, buy, sell and exchange used to be great forms of access to this information. They were established communication channels that are just not being used as much these days. And we end up like trade me's been taken over with a lot of cheap throwaway stuff that comes in and people see and they buy it ahead of recycling. There's declining numbers of people with do-it-yourself skills. So we're not really doing that well. Is the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan really going to target those sorts of things? I don't think so. We already have now, students tend to get accommodation that's next to their education facilities, and people already choose to work in central when it suits them. But the whole GCSP is really targeted towards singles and couples, and it's not encouraging the family unit. At population growth, the growth predictions for Christchurch may be overstated. The Christchurch city population is not currently growing, according to the Stats New Zealand. There's a decreasing birth rate, an increasing death rate, and the business case says that we're going to have a 44% growth for the city. How are these predictions formulated? I went to Stats New Zealand some time ago. I did a project on the movement of the population across the city as a result of the earthquakes. And that's why the first years are broken down into wards. I wasn't able to get that data from Stats New Zealand for this, but I did get the final figures at the bottom. And you can see that between 2020 and 2022, the population for Christchurch is actually forecast to go down, not up. So suddenly we're going to have a 44% increase in population. I find that hard to believe. Waimakariri district have had growth, and yet in the forecasting, they're actually not predicted to grow at the rate that they have been. Theirs is 36% for Selwyn and 20% for Waimakariri. So this is quite interesting facts, really, when you're looking at the basis of it. So we're going to have 44% growth in the city, and they're all going to be into these little boxes. Where are these people going to be coming from? My guess is that it's immigration. And when I asked at the hui mai, that's what they said, immigration. But come on, we've got cultural differences because people are going to be coming into boxes right in the middle of your city. All I can see is, unless this is integrated properly, there's going to be a lot of problems with that. So I say no to all this expenditure. I've attended the City Council Finance Forum on Wednesday, and the terminology of volatility came up on a number of occasions. We're going into something that we don't know really where we're heading. We've also got the Alpine fault line sitting on our doorstep. And I'll just take you back to something I've got here. I'm actually doing a presentation to the Plan 14 change on the whole fault line, and I'll be talking extensively on that. In 2007, they were saying that the further we look into the future, the less likely it becomes, because it is most likely to occur now. And at that stage, they were saying that the Alpine fault will occur in the next 1 to 20 years. Just remember, this is in 2007. So when you look at the likelihood of that occurring so soon, I actually wonder why we are so far down the track with this plan without being able to take into consideration the effects of the Alpine fault line. I think we need to fix the infrastructure issues with the city, and I do think we need to look at how to integrate public transport in a better way. I've got a friend who's actually goes internationally and advises organisations and businesses on efficiency, and he put forward a submission to the council and just got totally ignored. I think it's sometime last year on things. And I'm thinking, if you've got somebody who's such, an expert in things and they're just completely overlooked, what else are you missing? So I think there's alternative options that just aren't here. And I listened to these people before with the rail and the trams and that, and there's a lot to take into consideration. I feel like this is being rushed through to meet an agenda that isn't ours. What we need to be doing is something that's right for the city, the people of this city. And there's a lot of peculiarities about Christchurch. That Alpine fault line is one of the biggest, because the impact that that will have on the city is massive. Anyway, there's some references here for everything that I've said. And that's thank you very much.
Thank you.
For
yes. Thank you very much, Ravina. We've got that presentation too, haven't we? So we'll certainly look at those. Any questions from the panel?
Have we got references for all the articles that you were referring to, Ravina? Are they included in the pack that you've sent on?
At the back of the...
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I've probably got more references if anybody wants them.
Yes.
I'm a bit of a data nut.
Thanks for your presentation, Ravina. Okay, the last presenter of the day is Paul. Thank you, Paul, from the Waitai Coastal Burwood Linwood Community Board. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for hearing from me on behalf of the Waitai Community Board. Waitai Community Board covers the coastal Burwood and Linwood wards of the Christchurch City Council, which is pretty much all of the eastern suburbs going from the Waimakariri River all the way down to the end of the Brighton Peninsula and into as far west as Marshland Road, and includes Woolston, where I happen to live. We represent an area that is and will be disproportionately affected by sea level rise, which faces challenges of inequality, inequity, and lack of accessibility to services and transport options compared to other areas of Christchurch City. The Wastewater Treatment Plant Response Report, which you may have seen, is a timely reminder that the people of Christchurch East and their concerns need to be engaged with properly. And when we say there is a problem, those concerns need to be taken seriously. While Christchurch East has received a huge amount of capital investment since 2011, the relationship with decision makers, and that's across the board, has not improved, and if anything has worsened. So I just want to take this opportunity to say to the Greater Christchurch partners, nothing about us without us. So into my submission. So the board is generally supportive of the proposed public transport system and mass rapid transit for Greater Christchurch. However, the board wishes to see provision of mass rapid transit services eventually extended to the east of the city. Before that, the connection to mass rapid transit needs to be through permanent corridors rather than short-term changeable bus routes to provide certainty for households and businesses planning for the future. Any areas of residential intensification must have good access to reliable public transport. We're concerned about the area around Eastgate Mall in particular. Now, I'm a motorist, and I'm a cyclist, and I'm a bus user, and I'm a pedestrian. I'm lucky to have the choice, but not everybody does, and we need a transport system that provides the means for everyone to travel through and around Greater Christchurch in comfort and safety. And the board would also like to see freight removed from residential streets and onto rail and coastal shipping. Streets in Bromley and Woolston are plagued with too many heavy vehicles. Residents should be safe for the people who live there, a public space that's shared by us all. It can't be safe with heavy vehicles and fast-moving cars. And on to 1.2, the board does not wish to see further urban sprawl and supports residential intensification in areas with the capacity. The implication of the plan in terms of residential development is that further intensification close to the coast or in areas particularly prone to inundation should not continue. The board supports this. The board is in favour of intensification where the land is suitable and where the infrastructure is or can be provided at reasonable cost. But within the blue areas on map 7, there should be none. Intensification also shouldn't occur within any of the areas with vacuum sewers, per the council's submission on Plan Change 14 regarding the Aranui, Prestons and Shirley catchments. The board also supports better controls on the residential industrial interface, ensuring that industrial activities do not unreasonably impinge on the quiet enjoyment of people's homes. We have numerous examples of this in our ward area, notably in Bromley and Woolston. Land use within these zones is changing in a way that impinges working class communities. This is not a case of reverse sensitivity, but unintended consequences of poor zone controls and the operative Christchurch City District Plan and poor enforcement by the relevant authorities. To 1.3, we are really happy that the Ihutai, the Avon Takaro estuary, is included as a Ngā Tūranga Tupuna, an area with concentrations of culturally significant sites. That's really great that it has been recognised in that way. We wish to ensure that the people in East Christchurch have equitable access to green space and natural beauty, and including pockets of native biodiversity that still exist. I'd like to see those protected. 1.4. The community board supports the development of green space in every part of Greater Christchurch, especially in areas which are underserved, and the limiting of development in ecologically sensitive locations. Greater Christchurch should limit its sprawl and incorporate green spaces of various sizes. The board also believes it is important to prevent land banking on the urban fringe to realise opportunity for, and is concerned about potential perverse incentives in the residential property market, such as what happened in Auckland with their metropolitan urban limit. 1.5. And I'll just quote the plan. Eastern Christchurch has also been identified as a priority area rather than a priority development area, to recognise the need for a partnership approach to support this area to adapt to the impacts of climate change and to strengthen resilience. For this to be more than just words, local, regional and central government need to follow through and provide significant support for us to cope with existing and future challenges. The question is, do you mean it? The plan is unclear what resilience means. Residents of East Christchurch fear being abandoned to deal with the challenges, current and future, We cannot face those challenges without substantial support. While development in East Christchurch won't include a lot of new housing, there is ample opportunity to invest in the amazing natural assets we have: the red zone, the coast, the Otakaro, the lower Opawaho, Puhara Kikinui, Sticks, native wetlands in the Ihutai. They are and should be the jewels in the city and region's crown. They need to be invested in and developed for the East and for everyone to enjoy now and for future generations. Areas prone to coastal inundation and the effects of sea level rise should be considered as part of the Coastal Hazards Adaptation Program, but the plan does not specify how it will be incorporated in that. So that Coastal Hazards Adaptation Plan program needs to be a core part of the spatial plan rather than adjacent to it. And in general, the board supports the spatial plan, but wants to ensure that the East is part of the future of Christchurch as we all adapt to the challenges of climate change together. And happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thanks, Paul. Questions? Yes, thanks, Grant.
I sense one of the other submitters who came from another board in the East, that you're really wanting more information about the state of play, about your adaptation plan and what might happen in the future. Is that a key to your board understanding a little bit more?
Yeah, and so while there might be sort of varying perspectives across the east side, as the coastal hazards adaptation planning has gone about on the Banks Peninsula, there is a realization that this is something that is really important and that every community can do. And so it's really vital that we move on this, but it's not currently resourced well enough for us to be able to do it. Like, we have no idea who's going to be next. And, you know, there's some, like, we have an idea that maybe we could start with one of the smaller communities like Brooklands, which is also particularly affected.
So if you had a bit more of a, I mean, in a way, these maps, and it's good that you're referring to quite a range of natural hazard issues within the coastal environment and in your area in particular. So your communities acknowledge those. It's about how you go forward in that. And when you look at map 7 and map 8, in terms of the potential future, well, existing and future constraints on good places to develop or whatever, that there is a bit of visioning required and a bit of conversation required from your perspective, and how that happens in the future.
Yes, and as I mentioned before, like there is room for positive development, and that you know, it's not going to be new business parks and you know, lots of new housing in the coastal area, but there's huge natural assets there that can be capitalised and improved on, you know, and the East to be a great place to live for generations to come.
Thank you, Grant. Do we have any other questions? Thanks, Kate.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back towards the beginning of your presentation where you talked about public transport, which I think, as Grant has mentioned, has been talked about before by other submitters. You talked about permanent corridors of reliable public transport. What does that mean in practice? What are you your board visualizing in practice?
So, and it was a bit, what's the word? It's a bit of an ad lib on my part. But we talked about one of the issues we have. I'll use an example of Bromley, where there was a bus route that went through it, and a few years back, ECAN cut the bus route, and now it's one of the most, it's completely unserved, really. There is a bus route that goes through like 2 or 3 times a day off peak, or maybe 4 times. If you're going to give people transport options, you need and certainty in terms of, say you wanted to do, I'm not suggesting that you wanted to do this, but intensification in somewhere like Bromley, it needs to be served by a transport corridor. And we know that when you put in permanent corridors, that it gives people certainty to invest as well. So it drives investment. It makes it, instead of being like, oh, the bus route might change, I'm not going to get foot traffic. Gives people certainty that there will be foot traffic there.
So can I ask, are you envisaging that becomes a tram or a light rail type route?
I mean, in terms of the form of permanent public transport corridors, I'm not taking any particular view. I mean, it's more that there will be public transport there. In terms of flexibility of the mode of permanent public transport, but it's the permanence that's key.
Grant, more of a comment than anything. In terms of the public transport, the PT Futures program, which is uplifting the level of service, is trying to gain momentum. There's a bit of a lull in COVID-19 and driver shortages, but that's now balanced out and improving a lot. And in terms of the corridors that you'll see on map 2 and map 14, the idea is that the level of service will be lifted, especially along those core routes. And then in conjunction with that, the MRT is something that threads through to north and south as well. So it's getting there. It's a frustratingly slow process. It's an expensive process. And so it's just managing that in conjunction with government policy, Waka Kotahi, so who are part of the partnership as well. So I understand your frustration.
Yeah, and the final abolition of the public transport operating model hopefully will help that.
Paul, I have one follow-up question on the same theme that Kate and Grant were talking about. When you're talking about a permanent corridor through to the east, you're not suggesting, like on the spatial plan, there's MRT corridors through to Papanui and Belfast and then Riccarton to Hornby. You're not sort of suggesting that we need to have a MRT corridor through to the east?
The board would like to see as a continuation of the rollout of MRT, a extension to the east. Yes.
Is there a logical place?
Well, Eastgate is that Insour's Road, Insour's Aldwins to Eastgate is probably the logical place for that to go.
Yes.
I'm not a public transport expert. I just know that that's that area around it, from that the intersection with Linwood Ave through to up to the intersection wide by Kerr's Wainoni Road. It's currently proposed to be intensified. So it would, if you're going to intensify that area, having access to mass rapid transport would make sense.
So we'll perhaps ask a question for our officer team just about that. We are having a process as issues like this come up, and we have questions in our mind that are raised. So we'll ask a question of the staff about the extension of the mass transit network to the east. What's the information about what options have been looked at? Why is it specifically why it's not there? And we'll get some feedback on that particular issue, Paul, I think, just to help with our decision making.
Cool. That's excellent. Thank you. All right.
Any other questions? No. Well, thank you very much for your attendance.
Cool.
And that brings us to the end of our hearings for today. We'll be back on Monday. We'll reconvene. Thank you very much, panel, all the staff and everyone that's come along to listen. Appreciate the public attendance. Thank you very much. So we are going to finish with a karakia just to close us off. So It's up there, so it's led by Victoria.
Kia whakairia te tapu, kia wātia atiara, kia turiki whakatakata ai, kia turiki whakataka ai. Hui e, tai te.
Thank you, Victoria. Travel safe home, everyone.